transfixed the nation in at the most remarkable way. And Brianna Jai, of course, was a trans girl, a transgender teenager. And it is to transgender issues that we turn our attention first this morning, with the publication today of the Cass report into the treatment of children who are questioning their gender. Language is very important, or unsure perhaps about their gender. Language is incredibly important in this issue, and for that reason we will begin with words. And I think the word that we should begin with is toxicity. It is hard to imagine actually a more ringing vindication, if you like, and I appreciate the dangers of using that word, but a more ringing vindication of those of us who have refused to engage in the vituperative attacks that both sides, and I think today we can perhaps use that word with some confidence, the vituperative attacks that both sides have inflicted upon each other. I don't think we've ever addressed the issue of puberty blockers on this programme, except from, I think, perhaps a very long time ago, a factual perspective, an explanatory perspective. And part of the reason for that is that you can see some, or you could, if you were being honest, see some wisdom on both sides. In short, the idea of administering life-changing, body-changing chemicals to children who are unsure of their gender identity is quite arresting. You think, no, that you should wait until they're older. If you don't want to think particularly deeply about this issue, you could even invent an age now at which you would introduce a blanket ban on all gender treatments, all puberty blockers until that age. And I mean, that's not an untempting position, because the biological impact of puberty blockers is so profound. But the other explanation, which I think we perhaps did touch on air, the other explanation is, of course, the postponement of puberty blockers sees the body of the child change more than it otherwise would, which means that if they then pursue life as a transgender adult, they are dealing with issues that would not have been in place had the puberty blockers been administered earlier. And therefore, the umpteenth time is an illustration of why this is such a difficult territory to explore. If you need another example, then how about this? Who really is qualified to contribute to this conversation except people who started transitioning when they were young, even arguably, because the focus of the report is, I think understandably, on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. The only people really relevant to this conversation, I think, are the people who've had it, or the families of the people who've had it. And then you're left with a question of statistics, which seems grim, but is there evidence that an overwhelming majority of children who've had this treatment regret it? Or do we pay far too much attention because of, I think, the toxicity of the debate, or the way in which some of the media vested interests have stuck their colours to a mast from a very early stage? Do we just focus too heavily upon the, I think, relatively small proportion of people who regret having had this treatment? There's one in particular who'd have been recently released from a mental health hospital, from psychiatric care, and who was then fast-tracked down a path of puberty blockers, which I think to anybody on the outside, you would think, whoa. So, I mean, the inquiries must be conducted by paediatricians, and they have been. That's exactly what Hilary Cass is. But the people of whom you are asking questions about what has happened, what will happen, and what should happen in the future, you would think would be focused on the people who have experienced the treatment. And that seems to me to be pretty much what she has done. And I can't see a clear way through that. You know that NHS England has already banned puberty blockers and switched to a new holistic model of care in which under 18s experiencing confusion will receive psychological support rather than medical intervention. So they've put the limit at 18, which opens the door to some of the problems that I've just discussed. I think part of the issue, and in fact I wonder as I get older, whether the most toxic territory is the territory where certainty is hardest. If certainty is really hard and you know in your waters, you know in your bones that certainty is close to impossible, something about humanity makes us double down on our own faux certainty. And that, I think, is part of the reason why the conversation displays the toxicity that Hilary Cass describes, I think, so powerfully. I mean, it's actually heartbreaking to read elements of her conclusion and then go online and see people proving her point in spectacular fashion within minutes of the words being published. The toxicity, we'll look again at some of those words regarding toxicity in just a second. And the question I think I'm poised to ask you, albeit that there'll be plenty of room to examine, if you like, the reality of lived experience. I think the question that all of us have an interest in answering is why so toxic? Why has it become such a toxic conversation? And I think part of the answer is we don't like uncertainty. I don't like uncertainty. This, along with the Middle East, oddly, is probably in the top two topics that I find hardest to address, because I like to have firm opinions. I like to have strong views. If I've got a strong view, I don't mind if I upset you. If I've done the work, I've done the thinking, I don't mind if I upset you. I used to mind a bit, but you develop confidence in your own convictions. And yet when we turn our attention to this, I do mind if I upset you, because I don't have really concrete opinions just two of the reasons that I've already just demonstrated to you, that the tension between providing medical intervention too early versus the tension in providing it too late. And you will know, if you have paid even the blindest bit of attention to this programme over the last few years, you do know that I generally steer clear of it for another reason, which we can ignore today, given the national nature of this report. So we can ignore this today. And that is that it is a relatively disproportionate number of people that are affected by this. For the whole of society to take an interest in something that affects such a tiny amount of people is not in and of itself a bad thing, but it is, if you like, a confusing thing for many of us. Even when I watch the switchboard for other programmes at this station, that you can sometimes get a shortish queue, usually of men who've got no personal investment or interest in this issue whatsoever, queuing up to talk about it. But apart from that, it is not of interest to people who don't have, and excuse my language, who don't have any skin in the game. You either have passionate vitriol, or you have honest confusion bordering on lethargy. It's had nothing to do with me, doesn't affect. And then, if you have children of a certain age, the likelihood of them having friends or even perhaps going down a path of gender confusion themselves has increased exponentially over the years. But that's what happens when conversations become more public. That's what happens when stigma is removed. And so there are, in no particular order, a bunch of reasons why this conversation is historically difficult. But apart from my brief flirtation with the notion of being almost uncertainty phobic, humans finding it really difficult to admit nuance or grey areas. And you know, I get that toxicity directed at me when I say that. If I historically say, or I have said in the past, a bit pompous, I don't think I've said anything historic. So if I say, and I have said in the past, that in many of the crucial questions at the heart of this conversation, I can see both sides, that, oddly, enrages everybody. You probably invite more abuse as a public figure by refusing to pick a side than you do by picking a side. And obviously, there are levels of being a public figure. I don't think anybody has received as much comment in this territory as J.K. Rowling, for example, has, much of which is pretty hideous, but there'll be plenty of people who think her contribution to the conversation has been hideous. To step back and say, I'm not sure about bits of it, I'm not sure about elements of it, is to light both fireworks. It's to light the blue touch paper on both sides of the divide, which I think perhaps is why I haven't found it very fruitful or informative in the past. But today that's what we've got to do. That's what we've got to do. I will keep an eye on my text, but they are moving so quickly already this morning that it will be difficult for me to be completely democratic, if you like. But I'll read you this particular paragraph first, all right? The toxicity of the debate is perpetuated by adults, and that itself is unfair to the children who are caught in the middle of it. The children are being used as a football, and this is a group that we should be showing more compassion to. Now, when I coined the phrase footballification to describe an inability to admit that your own side could ever be remotely wrong or that the other side could ever be remotely right, I wasn't thinking of this issue. But it is, as I've just alluded to, it is among the best imaginable examples of what the phenomenon of footballification seeks to convey. And it is, I'm sure it's a coincidence that Hilary Cass has deployed football as the analogy for her dissection of the debate. But goodness me, the phrase that I use about having your football scarf, your red scarf or your blue scarf tied so tightly around your neck that it's cut off the flow of blood to your brain has never been more pertinent, has it? It's the most perfect illustration of what I try to describe when I talk about footballification. I usually talk about corner kicks on the television. When you see the vicious hatred on the face of fans being directed at a player kicking a ball in a different coloured shirt from the ones that they're wearing, and the adulation that they reserve for the people wearing the right coloured shirts, and the speed with which their allegiances will switch if the player changes teams and swaps shirts. It's insane. And I love football. Come on, you Reds. It's insane. But it's why she uses football as the example in this context. Part of the problem now, of course, is that very few people listening to this will think that they are the contorted face football fan spitting venom and hatred at the person who has the audacity to wear a different coloured shirt. But you might well be. Because if you've engaged in this debate at all, you've probably perpetuated some of the toxicity that Hilary Cass describes, unless, of course, you've tried to do what I do, which is to say you're sometimes both as bad as each other. And then everybody hates you. But hey, that's my cross to bear, not yours. So here's the question. Why? Why is this conversation, which affects and concerns so few of us, and that's relevant in particular to the treatment of children with gender confusion, it affects and concerns so few of us, why is it so toxic? Why is the debate so toxic? Why is it so hard for so many to see that this, in the words of Hilary Cass, is unfair to the children who are caught in the middle of it? The children are being used as a football, and this is a group that we should be showing more compassion to. Why is it so toxic? 0345 6060 973. And if you recognise a bit of yourself in her description, if you are somebody already perhaps sharpening your blades, baring your teeth, you perhaps could even be angry with this incredibly measured and well thought out introduction. Why do you think you are so, let's not say toxic, because most toxic people probably don't think they're toxic. But why do you think you are so passionate about this issue, given that it affects you personally, or even your children personally, not one jot? because that's probably the thing that still confuses me the most. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need.